Lesson 4. Henry VIII. Henry VIII was King of England from 1509 until his death in 1547. He is best known for his 6 marriages and his role in the English Reformation. Henry was born in Greenwich Palace. He was crowned king in 1509 when he was just 17 years old. He married his brother's widow, Catherine of Aragon, soon after being crowned. He was a tall man at 6 foot and strongly built. When he was young, he loved athletics such as jousting, hunting and dancing. He also was well educated and could read and speak Latin, wrote poetry and his own songs. Where Henry VII had been careful with money and resisted spending, Henry VIII was a party king and embraced lavish entertainments and festivals. Henry VII was known as boring. Henry VIII, in contrast, was seen as clever, fun and handsome. He sought military adventure and led several wars against the French in hopes of taking more land. To show off his wealth, he had many palaces built in England. He is well known for his love of eating, drinking and dancing, but as he grew older, his overindulgence led to him being very overweight. He was a ruthless ruler, known for his great temper, strong-willed and stubborn. He would execute anyone who stood in his way. In fact, it's estimated he had more than 70,000 people executed. Some had been people he had once been closest to. Henry VIII is known for being the king who had 6 wives. To remember their fates, use a simple poem. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorce, beheaded, survived. Catherine of Aragon. Catherine was the youngest daughter of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, rulers of Spain. As a baby, she was engaged to Prince Arthur of England, and at 16 in 1501 she travelled to England, where she was wed. Arthur died and Catherine was then engaged to Henry VIII, so that England wouldn't have to pay back the bride money known as a dowry to her parents. But due to tensions between Henry VII and Spain, the marriage did not go ahead until Henry VII died and Henry VIII was crowned king. During those 9 years, Catherine had to live in near poverty, despite the fact that she actually had a stronger claim to the English throne, as she was distantly related to both House Lancaster and House York. Catherine was known as a good and much-loved queen. She was made Queen Regent whenever Henry went to war, and she had 6 children, but sadly all of them died except for her daughter Mary, who would become Mary I. Henry was desperate for a son and heir, but when it became clear that Catherine could no longer have children, Henry looked into ways he could end their marriage. Henry appealed to the Pope to grant an annulment, claiming that the marriage was never legal because she'd been previously married to his brother. The Pope refused. After 7 years, Henry took matters into his own hands and began the English Reformation. In ending the power of the Pope in England and making himself head of the Church of England, Henry orchestrated his own divorce in 1533. For 7 years, Catherine had refused to accept that her marriage had not been legal, and after the divorce continued to not accept it. After the divorce, Henry banned Catherine from having any contact with her beloved daughter Mary. He declared Mary illegitimate and no longer heir to the throne. Catherine lived in relative seclusion. She was stripped of her title as queen and lived at various castles in England. Catherine died on January 7, 1536 at Kimbolton Castle. She was buried at Peterborough Cathedral. To celebrate her death, Henry and Anne Boleyn both wore yellow clothes. Catherine of Aragon's marriage and divorce from Henry VIII had significant consequences for England, leading to the English Reformation and the establishment of the Church of England. Catherine is often remembered as a strong and resilient woman who fiercely defended her rights and her daughter's claim to the throne. Henry's break with Rome. The religious and political changes that took place in England during the 16th century is known as the English Reformation. They resulted in the break from the authority of the Roman Catholic Church and the establishment of the Church of England. It was the biggest upheaval which occurred in Henry VIII's reign and one of the largest transformations in British history. It started because of the Pope's refusal to grant Henry a divorce from his wife, Catherine of Aragon. Enraged, Henry broke away from the Catholic Church and created a new Church of England and made himself head of it. In 1534, the Act of Supremacy was passed by the English Parliament, declaring Henry VIII as supreme head of the Church of England. This act effectively severed ties with the Pope and made the English monarch the highest authority in matters of religion within the country. The way prayers were said, how sermons were given and beliefs held were all changed. Henry ordered the dissolution of the monasteries and religious houses in England, forcing them to shut. This involved the seizure of their assets, expulsion of monks and nuns, and destruction of religious artefacts. The process was often brutal, with violence, looting and displacement of religious communities. Followers of the new church were called Protestants, as they were protesting against the authority of the Catholic Church, and those followers of the old faith were called Catholics. There was much divide across the country between Protestants and Catholics, a divide that lasted for hundreds of years. While Henry VIII broke away from the authority of the Roman Catholic Church, his religious policies were not always tolerant. During his reign, there were periods of persecution against both Catholics and Protestants, depending on the monarch's religious leanings at the time. This led to the execution of individuals who held opposing religious views. Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn was Henry VIII's second wife. She was the daughter of Thomas Boleyn and the niece of the Duke of Norfolk, both who were powerful men in the court. She had spent her childhood at Hever Castle and then at the age of 12 was sent to the Netherlands court and later spent time in the French court. Here she engaged with discussions about the power of women and the reformations in the church. When she returned to England, she joined the English court as Catherine of Aragon's lady-in-waiting. Due to her beauty, education, sophistication and wit, King Henry VIII quickly fell in love with Anne. This led to a 7-year battle to try and get a divorce from Catherine. In January 1533, Henry and Anne secretly married, but it wasn't until May that his marriage to Catherine was officially ended. Anne was crowned queen in June, but she was disliked by the people who blamed her for the English Reformation and still held loyalty and love for Catherine. Anne Boleyn's marriage to Henry VIII played a significant role in the English Reformation. She was a supporter of the religious reform and influenced Henry's decision to break with the Roman Catholic Church and establish the Church of England with himself as head. In September 1533, Anne gave birth to a daughter, Elizabeth. Henry did not even try to hide his disappointment that she was not a boy. Henry then suffered a serious jousting accident. It left him with a permanent ulcer on his leg, which caused a lot of pain. It is recorded that his personality also changed after the accident, going from fun and sporty to vicious and paranoid. The accident occurred at Greenwich Palace on the 24th of January 1536. Both Henry and his horse had been heavily armoured. Henry was thrown from the horse and then the horse fell on top of him. Henry was unconscious for 2 hours and was believed to be fatally injured. The shock of the news caused Anne Boleyn to miscarry their longed-for baby boy. Henry declared that she would never produce a male child and turned against her. On May 2nd, 1536, Anne was arrested and taken to the Tower of London, accused of having multiple affairs with men, including her own brother. She was said to be a witch because she had 6 fingers on one hand. Anne's own uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, presided over the trials of both Anne and her brother. They were both found guilty. Anne's brother was beheaded before Anne herself was beheaded on May 19th. Her daughter Elizabeth was declared illegitimate, just like Princess Mary. Just 11 days after Anne's death, Henry married his next wife, Jane Seymour. Despite her short reign as queen and tragic end, Anne Boleyn left a lasting impact on English history. Her marriage to Henry VIII led to the English Reformation and establishment of the Church of England. Her daughter Elizabeth I would go on to become one of England's most famous and influential monarchs. Anne Boleyn is often remembered as a controversial and influential figure, known for her intelligence, charm and strong personality. Her story has been subject of numerous books, plays and films, and she continues to captivate the imagination of people today. Jane Seymour. Jane Seymour was Henry VIII's third wife and known as his favourite wife because she was the only queen to successfully give him a son and heir. Jane was a lady-in-waiting to both Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn. After having Anne executed, Henry quickly married Jane just 11 days later. She worked hard at trying to improve the relationship between Henry and his daughter Mary and encouraged her to return to court. Jane Seymour was crowned Queen Consort on June 4, 1536. She was known for her modesty, piety and gentle nature, unlike her predecessors. Jane Seymour gave birth to Henry VIII's long-awaited son and heir, Edward, on October 12, 1537. However, her health deteriorated after the birth and she died just 12 days later, on October 24th at Hampton Court Palace. It's after Jane's death that Henry became obese, going up to 28 stone and suffering from different weight-related illnesses. After Henry's death, he was buried next to Jane at Windsor. Jane Seymour is generally regarded as a more subdued and traditional queen compared with her predecessors Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn. Her death shortly after giving birth to Edward VI added a tragic element to her story, and she is often portrayed as a sympathetic figure in historical accounts and adaptations. Anne of Cleves. Anne of Cleves was Henry VIII's fourth wife. She was born in the small German state of Cleves. Henry was advised to marry Anne after the death of Jane because Cleves was a Protestant state and so would provide support for Henry in his new Church of England. Henry sent a painter, Hans Holbein, to paint Anne's portrait so that he could see what she looked like. After seeing her portrait, he agreed to their marriage. Henry married Anne on the 6th of January 1540, 5 days after she arrived in England. Henry, however, was not happy. He thought Anne was ugly compared to her painting, unsophisticated and awkward. She also did not speak English. On July 9, 1540, the marriage between Henry VIII and Anne of Cleves was annulled. Henry had already turned his head to another, Catherine Howard. After the divorce, Anne was given the title by Henry of the King's sister. Henry gifted Anne Hever Castle, the childhood home of Anne Boleyn, and a large income. Following her divorce from Henry VIII, Anne of Cleves lived a relatively quiet life in England. She was well treated by Henry and maintained a good relationship with him. She received several properties and a generous income, becoming one of the wealthiest women in England. After Henry's death in 1547, Anne of Cleves remained in England. She outlived all of Henry's other wives and witnessed the reigns of Edward VI, Lady Jane Grey, Mary I and Elizabeth I. Anne lived a comfortable and independent life, enjoying her wealth and properties. She died on July 16, 1557, at the age of 41 and was buried in Westminster Abbey. Anne of Cleves is often remembered as the wife who was able to escape a disastrous marriage to Henry VIII relatively unscathed. Her amicable divorce and subsequent financial security set her apart from Henry's other wives, and she's often seen as shrewd and fortunate survivor of the Tudor court. Catherine Howard. Catherine was Henry's fifth wife. She was the cousin of Anne Boleyn and grew up in her step-grandmother, the Duchess of Norfolk's household. Although she could read and write, she was the least educated of all Henry's wives. Catherine joined the court in 1540 and served as Anne of Cleves' lady-in-waiting. Henry quickly fell in love with her beauty, and after the divorce from Anne of Cleves, Henry married Catherine. Catherine was between 15 and 19 years old at the time, while Henry was in his mid to late 40s. Henry was besotted with Catherine. He called her his rose without a thorn and gifted her many presents. Catherine, however, was not happy. Henry was old compared with her and become very overweight. He also may have smelled quite badly from the ulcers in his leg and the gout he suffered through excess drinking. Catherine started having an affair with one of his courtiers, Thomas Culpeper. Rumours started circling in court about her unfaithfulness. Then a man named Francis Derham revealed a previous affair he'd had with Catherine. When the news reached Henry, he was enraged. He drew his own sword and swore to kill her himself. He had to be calmed and instead had her sent to the Tower. On her arrest, she managed to escape and ran down the gallery in Hampton Court Palace, screaming for Henry's mercy. She was caught before she could reach him and dragged off to the Tower. Multiple visitors, even to this day, have reported hearing her screams in what is now known as the Haunted Gallery. She was beheaded on February 1542. Catherine Howard's story is a cautionary tale of the dangers and consequences of courtly intrigue and the perils faced by those who found themselves in the dangerous world of Henry VIII's court. Catherine Parr. Catherine Parr was Henry's sixth and final wife. Her mother Maud had been a lady-in-waiting to Catherine of Aragon, and Catherine was named after her. Catherine was well educated, speaking Latin as well as French and Italian. She'd been married twice before Henry, both times her husband had died. Jane Seymour's brother Thomas also wished to marry Catherine, but after King Henry made his intentions clear, Catherine felt she had little choice but to marry the king. On July 12, 1543, King Henry and Catherine Parr were married at Hampton Court Palace. Catherine was known for her intelligence, kindness and religious piety, which appealed to Henry. By their marriage, Henry was very overweight and suffered greatly with ulcers on his leg. It's said that Catherine was more of a nursemaid than a wife to him, and she did much to try and placate his bad temper. She also cared for all three of his children and made sure that Elizabeth and Edward received good educations. Catherine was a dedicated Protestant, and many of Henry's courtiers disliked her and feared her influence. They plotted to have her removed, and Henry very nearly signed her death warrant, but she managed to convince him to spare her. During Henry VIII's military campaigns in France, Catherine served as regent of England from 1544 to 1545. She was also a strong advocate for religious reform and supported the Protestant cause. She encouraged Henry to read and discuss religious texts and played a role in spreading Protestant ideas. Catherine Parr was the first Queen of England to publish her own writings. She authored several books, including Prayers of Meditations, which reflected her religious beliefs and provided guidance on spiritual matters. Henry died in January 1547. Catherine had survived. She quickly married her love, Thomas Seymour, much to the shock of the court. Princess Elizabeth lived in her household. In 1548, Catherine gave birth to her own daughter Mary, but died soon after the birth. She survived Henry by just 19 months. Catherine Parr is often remembered as a compassionate and intelligent queen who played a significant role in promoting religious reform during a dangerous period in English history. Her writings and influence on Henry VIII's religious views contributed to the development of Protestantism in England. Catherine Parr's ability to navigate the complexities of Henry VIII's court and her commitment to the religious beliefs have made her a respected figure in history. She is often seen as a survivor and a champion of religious tolerance and education for women. The Mary Rose. Henry sought battle victories, which drove him to strengthen both England's defences and means of attack. The Mary Rose is a famous warship of the English Tudor Navy during the reign of King Henry VIII. She was built in Portsmouth, England, and was launched in 1511. She was one of the first ships to be built with gun ports, allowing for the use of heavy cannons in naval warfare. The Mary Rose served in several naval campaigns, including the wars against France. Over the years, the ship underwent several modifications and upgrades to accommodate changing naval warfare tactics and technologies. On July 19, 1545, during the Battle of the Solent against the French fleet, the Mary Rose sank off the coast of Portsmouth. The exact cause of the sinking is still debated, but it's believed that the ship was destabilised by a combination of factors, including strong winds, improper loading and design flaws, which led to water pouring in through the portholes. The Mary Rose remained underwater for over 400 years until it was rediscovered in 1971. A massive salvage operation was undertaken to recover the ship and its artefacts. The ship and its contents were carefully preserved and are now displayed at the Mary Rose Museum in Portsmouth. The Mary Rose is of great historical significance as it provides valuable insights into Tudor naval warfare, shipbuilding technique and everyday life on board a warship. The artefacts recovered from the wreck, including weapons, personal belongings and even the remains of some crew members, offer a unique glimpse into the past. Henry VIII's court. Courtiers were expected to adhere to strict rules of etiquette and protocol. These were elaborate ceremonies and rituals of various occasions, such as banquets, masques and jousting tournaments. The court was known for its extravagant fashion and luxurious lifestyle. Courtiers wore elaborate and expensive clothing, often made of rich fabrics and adorned with jewels. The king himself was known for his lavish attire and extravagant spending. The court was a hub of entertainment, with music, dancing and theatre being popular forms of amusement. The king and his courtiers enjoyed hunting, gambling and various indoor and outdoor games. Henry VIII was a patron of the arts and attracted talented artists, musicians and writers to his court. The court was a hotbed of political manoeuvring and rivalries. Courtiers veered for the king's favour and sought to advance their own interests. Henry VIII's court was known for the rise and fall of influential figures. Women played important roles at Henry VIII's court, both as wives and consorts of the courtiers and influential figures in their own right. Henry's wives, such as Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn, had significant power and influence, and their presence shaped the dynamics of the court. The religious landscape at court underwent significant changes during Henry VIII's reign. The break with the Roman Catholic Church and establishment of the Church of England brought about religious tensions and conflicts, with courtiers having to navigate these changes and align themselves accordingly. Despite the opulence, the court was not always a healthy place. Outbreaks of diseases like the sweating sickness were common, and hygiene practices were not always up to modern standards. Overall, life at Henry VIII's court was a mix of luxury, political intrigue and cultural refinement. It was a place where power, wealth and influence intersected, and where courtiers sought to navigate the complexities of court life to secure their positions and advance their interests. Henry died on January 28, 1547 at the age of 55 and was succeeded by his son Edward VI. His reign had lasted from 1509 until his death in 1547, making it a total of 37 years. For your Henry VIII activity, you're going to hold a debate. With your friends or family, hold a debate on whether Henry VIII was a hopeless romantic or heartless tyrant. What evidence can you provide to support your arguments? You want to split into two groups. One group will take reasons for why Henry was a hopeless romantic. The other will make reasons for why Henry was a heartless tyrant. Take it in turns to argue your points, and also listen to the opposite side and see if you can counteract their points. At the end, you can draw your own conclusion.